Good morning and welcome to the April 5th special meeting of Council. The City of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish Nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. Do I have a mover or seconder for the approval of the agenda that the April 5th, 2023 special council meeting agenda be approved? So moved by Councillor Wood, seconded by Councillor Martin. Are there any errors or omissions? Seeing none, all those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Staff presentations, we have Ms. Holmes. Could you please give us a presentation regarding the draft 2023 to 2027 final financial plan? A presentation of the sewer and water fund activities for the draft 2023 and 2027 final financial plan and analysis of Canada Community Building Fund allocations. Ms. Holmes.
Good morning, Mayor and Council. Okay, we're in the final stretch. This will be our last kind of super detailed meeting, but clearly a critical component of the services that we offer with the utility funds. Just to touch base on where we're at. So as I said, this is the last kind of very detailed meeting. Next week on the 12th is our only evening meeting of the process, but that'll be bringing back to you all of the different bits and pieces that we've talked about at all of these meetings, more information that you've requested or things that we've put off until that date for a final decision. So that'll all be summarized for you, and next week will be a matter of going through some of those to see where you want to go on those. And then again, into early May, we'll be looking at the adoption of bylaws. We have Belinda Woods, Director of Operations, online today if there's any questions, as well as Heidi is here, our Manager of Utilities. So if there are some technical specific questions, she's on hand here to assist on that as well. And thank you for that. Okay, so looking at water and sewer utilities, I think we all know that this is one of our most critical services to our residents and ratepayers. This picture here is of Merritt during their storm event, and we had a scenario there where the flooding caused the whole town to essentially shut down because even those that weren't impacted directly didn't have water and sewer. And so this is an area that we need to be very mindful of, ensuring that our assets are able to continue to deliver services. And I think we have a team out there now that is really looking very carefully at the regular scheduling of that maintenance, as well as the renewal and replacement of those assets. And you'll see that reflected today in the financial plans. The utilities need to be self-funding, so the rates need to be set to cover the costs associated with delivering the services within each of these utilities. So we'll go through the revenues, which are different from property taxes in that you can't exactly know in advance what your revenue is going to be. With the property tax, it's really just a mathematical equation depending on what rate you set. Here, there can be different consumption, and we're seeing with climate change some impacts on those. And I'll go through a little bit of that today as to the challenges around estimating revenue on that, which of course we need to balance the budget. The other thing that staff have done in preparing these financial plans is, again, just looking at the most important considerations of safety and risk assessment around assets and our employment and our employees, and then just looking at reliability and efficiency of those services. So that's reflected in the numbers that we're bringing forward. What I'm pleased to tell you is that you'll see that in some cases, the budget numbers have actually gone down by staff looking at budgets where things aren't getting used and moving them to areas where it's needed. What we've also done is kind of consolidated some contingencies within the accounts, put one contingency in minor capital to cover off whatever might come up, rather than having a whole bunch of different pots of contingency. And I think that's a more efficient way to do it, as well as it kind of pulls it out from where we actually think those numbers should be living. So I'll let you know about that as we walk through it. Last comment on the utilities is there are allocations from our general fund to the utilities to incorporate the costs of administration here, of finance support, of engineering support, as well as an allocation of our operations yards, so that the water and sewer funds are essentially carrying their load of those various costs, again, to be recovered through those rates. They couldn't kind of just stand on their own without the involvement of the rest of administration staff and operations. So I'll point those out as we go through, but just so you know that we do an allocation on that and estimate that every year. Okay, in the slides that you have copies of, these are just some of the metrics that have been provided by utility staff, showing some of the increase in various assets that need to be maintained each year and the growth over the last 5 or 6 years related to that, whether it's new water meters, new hydrants, as well as just length of water infrastructure that has to be maintained and flushed. On the finance side, we issue utility bills twice a year, and those utility bills include water, sewer, and solid waste. And so that's just an illustration of some growth in the number of bills that are issued. You'll notice the significant increase in 2020, and that was when the new solid waste program came from the RDN, where it was all tracked separately in the organic waste and the tracking of cans. And so what that meant was that each individual household needed to have their own utility bill, where in the past some stratas would receive one invoice. Now it needed to be tracked. So that was quite a significant bump there. But since then, there's just been kind of expected growth on the number of bills issued. Okay, we'll jump into the sewer financial plan. The sewer utility includes some administration costs related to the collection system, lift stations, and treatment and disposal. We'll go through what's the most significant cost, which is the wastewater treatment, which happens at the French Creek Pollution Control Center and is billed to us through the RDN. And then, of course, our capital infrastructure costs. Looking at the bylaw, as we did for the general fund, I do find it interesting, again, to look at what are our ongoing costs and what are our non-recurring costs, and just taking a step back to look at where the amounts are on our ongoing costs so that we can be sure that we're generating enough revenue to at least cover that, and then to consider other ways of funding some of those non-recurring costs. And so you'll see in this case, in 2023 in sewer, we've got about 260,000 net income just from that operations amounts. And that goes towards funding those non-recurring items. And then at the bottom line, we've got our various capital and reserve transactions, which we contribute $375,000 as part of that capital funding envelope that we talked about in the general fund, where each year we're putting that much into reserves and then pulling out from reserves what we need in any one year. When we go and look at capital, you'll see there's still some carry forward that is funding some of the capital. So we haven't used all of that 375 in the year coming from capital reserve. So getting into some of the details on this, on the revenue side, as I said, this is more challenging to determine than property taxes. And sewer itself is billed as a function of our water fund. And so the sewer user rates are based on the winter billing cycle of the water function. And the reason that that's tied to that rather than summer is as many people irrigate. And obviously the irrigation is not going through the sewer system. And so tying it to that winter billing gives us a better estimate of what people are actually perhaps flushing down their toilets. In the financial plan is a 3% increase in rates reflected across all 5 years, which amounts to about $6 per year for a usual kind of average resident. We typically have had about a 3% increase in sewer and kind of kept up. When we get the results back from our sewer master plan this year, as well as some of the asset management work, that may build more into whether or not we need to be increasing that more to cover some of the capital replacement. But for now, this seems sufficient to cover our basic operations as well as a nominal increase to reserve contribution.
Sorry. Carry on.
Thank you, Mayor. Through Mayor to Ms. Holmes. So you mentioned that this is based on the winter billing, just to make it fair. But is it different for, let's say, the tourist and tourist commercial? Because their usage is predominantly more, even for sewage in the summer.
That's a good question. I believe it's still tied to winter, although the structure for commercial is a little bit different. And so let me just pull out, where's my billing sheet here? Yeah, so the sewer has an overage rate that is different, and I'd have to follow up on that for you, but I think it is the same and that it's tied to the winter billing, but I'll have to follow up with our billing clerk and get back to you on that.
Hello, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And just hypothetically, if it happens to be the same as residential or the rest of the city with winter billing, could it be looked at, be revised, or would that be a major?
Well, certainly as part of the sewer master plan, all the rate structures are reviewed. So yeah, that could be something that it may already be considered as part of that.
Thank you. You good? Good. It is. Carry on. Thank you.
Thank you. So as I was saying, there's two components to the sewer revenue, and that includes both our metered reading and twice yearly billing, but also there's a parcel tax, and that's paid by those that could connect to sewer system, i.e. the pipes are at their property, but they aren't connected yet. And so they pay an annual property tax as well. Interesting enough, with all of the development that's happened in Parksville over the last couple of years, there's quite a significant drop in the number of parcels that are left paying the parcel tax. And so you'll see actually a reduction in the revenue in that rate, despite an increase in the parcel tax rate itself. The number of parcels went down, just for your information, by about 56. So that's the reflection in the drop in revenue there. The other thing that I'll note for you in the sewer revenue is that because the RDN levies the wastewater charge through their requisition, we bill most of it through our property tax billing rather than through the rates. And we were in a process of transitioning that over to our sewer rates, but we need to work with the RDN because there's some legislation around how we can bill it. If they're billing it through the requisition, it needs to be billed through our property taxes. So that's something we're going to be following up with them, because it should really live in the sewer fund. That's the expense, but just as a matter of legislation, we need to bill it through our property taxes. So we have a transfer from general fund into the sewer revenue fund to cover the cost of that.
Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Through yourself to Ms. Holmes. Do the taxpayers know that chunk goes to the RDN? Is it pretty clear when they kind of get the paperwork, how the breakdown is? I don't know if maybe that would help them understand that a chunk of that, however we're taking it out of for the sewer property tax levy to the RDN is going straight through us to the RDN.
Yeah. Through the mayor. That's an interesting question. We do just have one line on our property taxes that is the RDN requisition. And I know more and more municipalities are starting to break things out on their property tax notice for a little bit more transparency, because not everyone goes to the RDN site to look at, okay, what was charged in Parksville. And last year, when there was such significant increases from the RDN, including the hospital district, I worked with RDN finance staff, and they did us up kind of a flyer with some of the information about the RDN with respect to Parksville's requisition specifically, so that when we had people coming to our counter that were cranky about it, that had actually nothing to do with Parksville, we could provide them some information and then have their 1-800 number very quickly at the top of it. So it's certainly something that we could talk about as to whether we wanted to have more of that. I know I've already mentioned some people break out police or fire on, so there's a better connection to the actual cost of some of these. Certainly what we would like to see is have this just transition over to the sewer fund directly. But yeah, it is a very significant cost.
Just as a follow-up to that, I think that's a good idea, Sean, that I was just wondering, with the little flyer that you're talking about that the RDN put out for our cashier counter staff, I wonder if that's something that could be included in the package when their tax notices go out. I know it's a popular topic because they do feel that the city of Parksville is responsible for everything, the water, the sewer and included. And it is quite a bit of the street talk as to what that's actually covering. So if we let them know in the interest of, you know, as you say, transparency, if we included it, if the RDN has quite a communications department, as we found out yesterday, that could definitely, you know, help us to explain, you know, get ahead of it before it actually becomes a problem and they get cranky with their people.
Yeah. Well, I'll follow up with the RDN again. It's a great idea. We put in our own flyer that breaks out kind of the pieces of the pie, but we have a new folder stuffer that probably could accommodate another flyer this year. So, I'll follow up with them, and maybe that's something that we could do, is that perhaps they could also add some insert into it, because the good thing about being able to pay online is we don't have as many residents coming. So we lose that opportunity to provide that information when we do get them in. Often the cranky ones like to come in person. So if they want to really get some good information, and residents have questions about that, and lots of people like to come in just to pay their taxes, and it's kind of a part of their annual routine, which we love, and it's nice to see that. But I'll follow up with RDN on that to see whether we could do that.
Thank you.
So that's the revenue. Overall, we've got about a 7% in total revenue increase, and we'll go through some of the expenditures now. So the first of those is what we've been talking about, is the Northern Community wastewater costs, and that's all about the French Creek Pollution Control Center. And the cost allocations to each of the participants in that function is based on relative flows. And I'll just flash forward a little bit. This graph chart is provided by the RDN and shows the relative percentages of the use at the French Creek Pollution Control Center. And what I would say is that these proportions change very little. All of those percentages are within 0.75% of the prior year. And Parksville's, last year was 47.55. So just a very small increase overall in that. So our cost increase that's reflected in the financial plan is related to actual cost increases, not a change in our proportion or share of those costs. So looking at those costs, last year was about 2.9 million. This year, close to 3.2 million, about an 8% increase. And when I followed up with RDN staff on that, they said the main reasons for that is, as the French Creek Pollution Control Center has had some growth in size in the last couple of years, they've got some increased staffing in this year's budget, as well as just the inflationary costs that we're seeing as well of operating the plant. And so that's the reflection of that 8% increase. There has been a lot of work and continues to be a lot of work on the plant. I think, did council go for a tour of that last year maybe? So yeah, at some point, I think it's very, very interesting to go and actually see how it works. And I think they're making lots of advancements there, but it is a plant that's over 25 years old, and there's a lot of our DCCs that we collect on their behalf are being put towards that capital works out there.
Thanks, Jed. Just a point of interest, here in Parksville, we have the Bay Avenue sewage lift station that's been under construction for about 2 years now. And it was a huge endeavor, and but for the interest of the public, it's nearing completion. And they hope to have it all finalized by July of this year, and which means rebuilding the beach access going down at the end of Bay Avenue down into Parksville Bay there. So that will be once again reopened to the public. But they ran into some very extreme challenges on that project, supply chain being one of them. But it was a very challenging job. But they're completing it now, and it does obviously forms a part of this increase that we have here. So it needed to be done. It was not functioning properly. So the end is near.
Great, thank you. I did see some costs in this year's budget for this function with the Bay Avenue. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, with respect to other operating expenditures, there's a number of different things that go into this. In our administration area is a lot of the allocations from other funds, as well as our management and supervisory staff for the utility. The collection system includes things like service repair, repairs and maintenance, flushing, and SCADA associated with the infrastructure of the sewer utility. And then lift station maintenance is all of the costs related to Craig Bay and Martindale Road lift stations. And again, as I commented earlier, we're trying to move the costs within this utility to where they're needed and pull out any of those contingency items, which I'll point out to you when we look at the minor capital. As you can see, overall, there's really a very marginal increase in this utility year over year. Moving on to minor capital for this sewer fund, we've got some carry forward items, as I've noted in the column beside the description, and that is the sewer video inspection program, which is a 10-year program of videoing all of the storm sewer and sanitary pipes. And so there's $50,000 per year in minor capital for that. The sewer master plan, which was started in 2022 and will be finished in 2023, which will inform a lot of the things that we've been talking about, including revenue structure, including infrastructure replacement. And then that works adjacent to development, which is in at $40,000 per year as well, just for things that may arise during the year. Those projects are typically led by engineering. The operations staff will be leading a couple of smaller projects, a CCTV camera replacements for $15,000. And then we've got that community park contingency, which council approved earlier, and just showing it here in the sewer fund, as well as there's that $10,000 contingency amount that I referenced that we've kind of pulled out of the operating expenditures and put it here so that we're really looking at harder costs on the operating side. And then funding both from sewer user fees as well as carry forward reserve for those. What I'll note for you in subsequent years like 2024 through 2027 is that I'm showing the contingency being funded by a carry forward reserve. So essentially, if it doesn't get spent in a year, I would carry that forward to fund the next year, not re-tax for the contingency every year. So that's how it's set up in the financial plan. Obviously, if it gets spent in the year, then we would re-tax for it in the next year. But just so that the financial plan essentially balances, but also shows that it will be there in the subsequent year.
Thanks, Jetta. Just a question regarding Bagshaw Street. There was a program or a process of relining the sewer pipes, as I understand it, instead of replacing it when they did the revitalization of Bagshaw. I was just wondering if that's being conducted now. Is it included in 2023 figures? Or was that carryover from 2022, where we're at on that one?
Yeah, it's both of those. It is being finished up. In fact, it might already be finished, and we'll see it in the capital, and the funds were carried forward for it because we had already taxed for it last year.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So, so it's being completed shortly, if not already.
If not already. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on minor capital? Okay, moving on to capital then. As the mayor just commented, we do have the completion of the Bagshaw project at $110,000 there and funded by carry forward. And then we've got our Moss Avenue infrastructure project, which council approved the award of earlier this year, which includes the storm, roads, water, and sewer altogether. So we had some carry forward of amounts for that. About half of that amount related to when it was taxed for, I think, in 2019. So we've been just carrying that amount forward. And then there's just the completion of the SCADA system upgrade project, which started in 2022. So just a small amount there to finish that off this year. I'll point out to you that the subsequent years in the infrastructure replacement, we've got our $375,000 per year, which is our funding envelope that we've defined so far. The amounts just say other from asset management plan. And what I'm meaning by that is that all of the works that we're doing this year will inform what the next priorities are and where the risks are in our sewer system. And that will inform what specific projects go into that year. So we just have those amounts there knowing that there will be a project. It's just not defined yet, and it'll be subject to what engineering's review of various reports and condition assessments that are being done in the current year. Okay, finally on the reserve is just to summarize with the reserve transfers, and you'll see that we've got that contribution to reserve of $375,000 a year, and that's part of that $4 million total funding envelope. And then transfers coming back out from reserves related to capital infrastructure and projects that we just went through. You'll see in this year, there's quite a significant amount coming forward from carry forward reserve, and that's related to Moss and to Bagshaw. So that offsets the amount that we needed to actually pull out of the capital reserve this year. And then the 50,000 carry forward reserve is just those contingency amounts that I referenced earlier. For your information, the capital fund at the end of 2022 was about $1 million. And within this 5-year plan, it actually accumulates and increases by about $300,000. So that's assisted, as I said, by the carry forward reserves, but we're making a little bit of ground over the 5 years. The sewer fund, the capital demands aren't quite as high as what we'll see in the water fund, but we're kind of holding our own and making a bit of ground in our capital reserves over this 5-year time frame. Okay, any questions on sewer before I move on to water?
Just a comment, if I may, this time, every one of these projects or every one of these sections and subsections that we've gone through, I can't help but notice that every one of them has a reference to the asset management plan. And I'm just understanding what a behemoth of a job that this is to do it. Mr. Bobin anyways mentioned about in the last meeting about the analyzing the asphalt surfaces of all of our roads with the new camera systems. But this is going to make a huge difference in us for our future projections for scheduling of maintenance on these, not just when we think, like it's time-wise, it's going to be actually as analyzed by the staff. So I just, heads up, thank you to the staff, because this has got to be a huge monster project. All this data is going to be coming in, and it's going to be now telling the staff where attention is needed in each one of their departments. And as you know, we have many departments that make up the city of Parksville. And so now they have to take all that data and analyze and say, okay, what's prioritizing and what's, what road or what sewer system is going to fail if we don't replace it soon. But it's going to make a much more even effect anyway, so that we can budget for it appropriately instead of like relying on a contingency. So the asset management plan was, I have to admit, somewhat of a mystery to me, what this was going to was, we ran through it for the last couple of years, and I wasn't really sure the true value of this, and now I'm seeing it. But unfortunately, now it's going to come back on the staff to take all that data and do something with it. But I'm really thankful anyways that this is now come into play, because it's going to make a much even taxation system for the taxpayers, and actually a better product in the meantime, instead of relying on failure of a system to tell us it needs replacing. So it's great. So yeah, good job on suggesting that.
Thank you for your comments on that, because it is really great to be in a position to have that information, but I think it also puts council in a stronger position to have really strong data on which to make decisions and have choices as to how to fund it or how to move forward with that. Without that kind of information, yeah, you're really looking at, okay, what has failed recently or near failure, and that's not ever where we want to get, especially with critical assets like our water system and sewer system. I think we saw that 2 falls ago, where a lot of communities, yeah, we're not used to living in a place where we can't just flush the toilet and run the taps. So I think both staff and council are going to be in a better place. And you're right, there's going to be a lot of great data to work with and evaluate, both from engineering and operations and finance. And our new capital asset position Mike has been just great in pulling a lot of this data together and trying to evaluate and really put us in a good place to bring good data to you for decisions. So I think this fall, when we've got a lot of these projects complete, it's going to be very exciting to come back with a much more fulsome look at this with some suggestions and some recommendations tied to our reserves and all of that. So I think we're really in a great place right now, just kind of on the precipice of having all of that.
Thank you.
Okay, the water fund. As you all likely know, the water utility includes both of our joint ventures, ERWS and AWS, as well as just our costs associated with operating the water utility, administrative, service of supply, purification and treatment, and transmission and distribution. And then we also participate in the RDN drinking water and watershed protection function, which isn't reflected in our utility, but that our taxpayers participate in through their RDN requisition. This is just a picture of the inside of the water treatment plant as well as the river intake, and the completion of the water treatment plant in 2019 changed a whole lot of things about how we operate the water utility and has put us in a better place, of course. So what we'll see as we walk through some of these costs is picking up our share of the costs of the water treatment plant per the ERWS and AWS budgets that council has already approved. Some statistics and metrics provided by our water utility folks out in the operations, just looking at some of the charts around consumption and production of water. And you can see that change in the graph in 2019 when the water treatment plant came online. Okay, just a high level looking at the bylaw. Again, looking at the ongoing costs as compared to the non-recurring, and in the water fund is where we're going to see a lot of non-recurring costs as we have a lot of kind of scheduled replacement and renewal that is coming on stream this year. But we do see still a positive contribution to operations at that net income from operations number of 185,000. And then looking forward, we've got quite significant numbers showing in the kind of capital reserves, long-term debt replacement or repayment, kind of what we call below the line. And so you'll see that there's capital expenditures planned this year of nearly $800,000. And then we've got our transfers to and from reserves, as well as our debt repayment that is related to the water treatment plant. Again, looking at water revenue, which I would suggest is even perhaps more challenging than the sewer revenue, in that what we saw last year was we budgeted nearly $4 million in water user fees based on the way we had always estimated our water revenue. And that was, we had an assumption of growth, and then we had an assumption of a rate increase, and we had an assumption of kind of new connections. And what ended up happening is we were short by about $450,000. And I think what it does reflect is some of the impacts that we're seeing with climate change. We've got where we had that really wet June and July and people weren't using as much water to irrigate. Then we got into a long dry season and then we had restrictions. And so this is where we run into the point where we can't be kind of guaranteed that revenue. And what had kind of been our regular process for estimating revenue really didn't work last year and really didn't work by quite a ways. Now, fortunately, we have good unaccumulated surplus. So it's not as though this bankrupts the water utility or anything like that, or even close, but it shows a couple of things. One, the importance of keeping those unrestricted reserves there for years like this. The second thing is we maybe need to look at how our water rate structure is set up. And it may be that we need to increase a base level fee, and the metered fee is different because we can't really kind of guarantee that, nor do we necessarily want that usage, right? We really want to promote conservation of water. And so the more we promote it, it's kind of taken from one hand and putting it in the other. So what I would suggest is that as part of our water master plan, one of the 4 infrastructure plans that's being done this year, rate structures and billing is part of that plan. And I spoke with our director of engineering to ensure that, because it may be that we'll be coming back to council next year with maybe we need to change up how we bill our water. And rather than it being mostly metered, we're going to change that to be sure that we are billing enough to cover our base operating fees, including the infrastructure renewal and the regular replacement and renewal of assets. So I've changed up, and I'll go through this year how I've estimated, and you'll note that this year's budget is estimating less revenue than last year. And that's partially based on our actuals from last year, but partially based on weather forecasts this year are already looking like maybe we're going to have restrictions early. And so I don't want to overestimate and think that we're going to be back to where we were in 2021. So the assumptions that are built into the water revenue is a 5% increase in user rates, and that's across all years, and that's reflected in both the metered rate and the parcel rate. A very conservative growth rate, because what I'm hearing from our director of planning is that the development is slowing down. And so I don't want to assume again that we're going to have as many connections as we have over the last couple of years. And then made an assumption that our 2022 consumption will be about 90% of our 2023 consumption will be about 90% of 2022 consumption. And that's based on discussions with our director of operations, just as to where she sees perhaps restrictions coming in at what time. And again, just trying to be really conservative on this, so we're not going in with too high a revenue estimate. What we didn't change in this is that there's a $20 per year water treatment reserve fee that is billed as part of the water bills. And we collect that money and put it straight into reserve. So there's no increase in that right now. So that's unchanged. The 5% doesn't affect that. So at a 5% increase in water across all years is about 15% for the kind of average user in a year. So again, although 5% sounds like a high number, and we have to be careful with percentages, I think that's a little over $1 per month to the average user. And so that's what I would propose, and that's what's reflected in the numbers here. Again, you'll see a drop in the water parcel tax similar to sewer, in that we had a significant drop in the number of parcels because a lot of those parcels had been developed. But we have an increase in number of connections associated with that. So although there is an increase in the parcel tax, the total revenue has come down from prior years because the number of parcels is fewer. The parcel tax last year was about $184 and would increase to $193 this year.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, through the mayor. So I think it might be helpful as an educational tool if you're sending out something to explain that just because we use less water, it's not going to necessarily cost us less money. I don't know, like you think automatically we're using less water. Okay, our prices are going to go down, but it's not true, right? Is that, you know, is that a fact, or am I just assuming that? I just think, oh, I use less water, I don't have to pay as much. So I wonder.
Yeah. Through the mayor. So it is to some extent, because there is a metered portion. So if you're using less, your bill would come down. But for the utility as a whole, if everybody uses a whole lot less water, then in order to cover our, basic operating costs, we would have to change up how that goes. So I think you can only increase the metered rate so far, because there also gets a point where people say the water's too expensive for me to keep irrigating or whatever they might do. But there is, again, a base level of water that's required by our residents. So it is a complicated scenario in trying to balance. You can't just keep increasing the price, I guess is what I'm saying. I think we need to look at it a little bit differently, perhaps. And these next couple years with, again, all of that information that we're getting on our infrastructure and our water master plan will inform some of that for us and give us some, perhaps some different alternatives on how we might collect revenue in the water utility fund.
Is that sort of a bad thing to do, to explain that, or no? I mean, I'm just talking about psychologically, because I really think myself, because I'm very concerned about water, always have been, always watched it, but then the price is still the same, but we don't want people to use more, right? So I don't know. Anyway, it's just a thought. I'm going to communicate. Yeah, because people want to know where their money's going for sure. Yeah, and we have cost expenses and things are going up. And okay, thanks.
Through the mayor, I think it is always good to deliver a message of conservation. I think we all want to do that, and as we see more and more climate impacts, I think that's important. But certainly, yeah, to understand that there are different components to that. Your water billing, you can save some by irrigating less and embracing the brown lawn and things like that. So for some people that will save money. Some people are at the minimum and they're going to be at the minimum already. We have lots of folks that are just perhaps 2 people in a house and they just don't use a lot of water. So but we have lots of people like their green lawn too. So it's kind of all over the place, but I think we always want to remember that message of conservation. Yeah. Yeah.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, through our Director of Finance. Just curious on the water treatment plant reserve fee remaining the same. How does that project forward? Does it kind of stay the same every year? Or is that kind of adjusted for inflation, or how's that calculated?
Thank you, through the mayor. It has been the same for quite a number of years. When the water treatment plant was completed, it actually dropped down a little bit. And I think part of what we'll be looking at, the asset management work is going on for the water treatment plant as well, in terms of forecasting ahead what will be replacement costs, what's going on with the RWS right now in terms of making sure the plant is operating as it should be and things like that, is that this will be part of what we revisit, is because things like this can ensure that we're covering our replacement cost and renewal. And I'm highly in favor of that kind of revenue structure, that we have a fixed portion, and having exactly an amount allocated to reserves is even better, right? I think that ensures that's happening. So with full transparency to our residents and ratepayers, that's what that's for. It's not part of whether you used water or not. It's part of being able to still turn on the taps and be able to turn on the taps in 50 years and still get that same quality of water. So I expect we'll be bringing exactly that type of scenario back to council in the fall when we're looking at all of this.
Follow.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that clarification. Do you foresee there being a significant jump based on what the asset management shows us? And if so, does it make sense to try to smooth that a bit?
Through the mayor? Yeah. So this amounts to about $143,000 a year that's going into the reserve, which isn't nothing. I guess the bottom line is I don't think we really know until we've done all of this work. However, there's some things that come up and you think, okay, we didn't know about that. There's other things that are actually going the other way. For example, new technology in pipes that where we were assuming we're going to have to replace them in 50 or 60 years, all of a sudden our capital asset accountant is finding, actually, those might last 100 years. Well, that changes the numbers by a very significant magnitude in terms of, say, an annual amount we would have to put aside a year. So I'm reluctant to kind of guess at this point, because I'm hearing things like that where, okay, maybe it won't be that different. So, but I feel like within 12 months, we're going to be having a much stronger understanding of what that is, as well as really doing a lot of financial analysis on how to fund those and giving council choices about how to fund that replacement. And the water treatment plant fee is a different one, just because that's a shared cost as well with the RDN, and we'll have to look at how that goes and whether there are proportions of water used and things like that are assumed within that change, or if there's any need to address those as well. So there's a number of factors in there. So I guess my long short answer is that I'd be reluctant to make too many changes this year and then have to kind of really redo them again next year. My guess is we're probably better to just do one more year at sort of our best guess, and then really bring some good data to make a strong decision based in data rather than a gut feel. Yeah. Of course, that's at council's discretion though, if you'd like to change it.
Thank you. I just have a quick comment about the revenue. It's kind of the meter rate revenue is really just not reliable. To base so much on it, I think we should be probably looking at a base rate, to actually give us a continuity of what we know what's going to be. The base rate is easy based on the number of users. With the meter rate, it being so unpredictable, whether it's climate change or whether it's a bad year for tourism and so forth, but we are counting on that meter rate to actually be part of our revenue. And it really is unreliable at that particular point, because there's lots of things affect us. The pandemic affected us, and then nobody would use water. And it's kind of, it's almost punitive to use the meters, to actually determine what the revenue is going to be. It should be the fact that you have access to the water, you know, is going to be more of a consistent amount of revenue. And I look at it on the other hand, if everybody gets really behind conserving water and everybody uses a lot less water, sorry, Sylvia, next year your rates are going to go up because you use a lot less water. So all those people that use a lot of water aren't using it anymore. So the revenue isn't there to actually support the system. So good for you for conserving, but not so good at the end of next year because we need that revenue. So I think that's just a wrong message to do. Really to say if everybody put in rain barrels and all the rest of it, then the city loses that revenue. So I believe it's better to flatten that out or change the ratio anyway, so to speak, I think would be the way to go in the future.
And I think you've exactly hit the nail on the head of how that logic becomes skewed. If we conserve more, we've got to increase the rates and it becomes quite circular. So yes, we do have a portion that is fixed, and I think you're exactly right. We maybe need to be changing the ratio of that. The fixed portion on an average user is about $160 of, say, the 250 average billing. So maybe when we look at this structure, it's a matter of changing the reserve fee and the fixed portion and less on the metered portion or something like that. So between operations and engineering and finance, we'll look at kind of the recommendations that come with the water master plan, but as well understanding what the infrastructure renewal and replacement piece is of our overall costs over the long term rather than just the short term operating costs. So there's lots of inputs into that, but yes, you're absolutely right. It's maybe a matter of considering the proportions. Yeah. Okay, the other couple of pieces on the revenue to the water fund is one, we have some transfers from other departments just related to costs that live in the water fund. The first of those is a transfer from the fire department related to hydrant maintenance. And so the fire department pays an amount over to the water utility crew for doing that work on the hydrants. And then there's a transfer from the sewer fund related to all of the billing function where they're reading the meters that are then used as an input into the sewer fund billing. And so there's a transfer from sewer fund for their share of that. Finally, we have DCCs that come in each year to cover the debt payments related to the ERWS. And so that's that $315,000, which is MFA debt that was incurred related to the construction of the water treatment plant. That debt will be in place until 2044. So we've got another 20 years of payments, but fortunately, the majority of that is covered by DCCs. And then last, we have some DCCs for capital, i.e. new capital that is in the ERWS. And so the revenue in these couple of years is related to the construction of the residual handling system out at ERWS. And so we have some DCCs there as well. On the expenditure side for water, again, we've got three significant categories here. Administration incorporates all of those allocations from other departments and as well as our management and supervisory salaries in that. Our manager of utilities, her salary is split between the two utilities as well as allocated partially to ERWS and AWS so that those other municipalities that are participating in those functions also share in the cost of her oversight of the utilities. The service of supply includes things like water testing, our SCADA system, the pump stations and wells and reservoirs and the maintenance of those. And then transmission and distribution includes things like new connections, all of the meter repairs and maintenance and replacement, and then the flushing of that infrastructure, hydrant and valve maintenance. And as I noted, some of those costs are shared with the sewer fund and the fire department as well. Within transmission and distribution, there's quite a significant increase starting in 2024 through 2027. And that's just to have a complete replacement of all of the water meters on a scheduled basis over that time. So we're doing a bit of catch up there. And so you'll just see a bump in the 5-year plan over those 4 years reflecting that. And similar to the sewer fund, staff has moved accounts and budgets around where to best meet the operations for this year and pulled out a contingency amount so it's no longer reflected in our operating expenditures. Again, you'll see that in fact there's been a minor decrease in the total operating expenditures in the water fund, and I think that's kudos to our staff there that are really looking at costs despite significant inflationary adjustments in this area, to really focus in on where are the things that are most important for the utility to focus on.
Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Holmes, so I see that the administration expenses are, so it's two parts to my question. Why is this budgeted more than the actuals of last year for the administration cost? And would that number likely change because of the bargaining that we'll be doing in the coming months?
Through the mayor. So one of the main reasons that it would be higher than last year is based on our estimated labor costs having an increase. So even though we don't have that settled, we've got assumptions built into this to try and give a best estimate. Given some recent settlements, we're wondering whether we're in the right ballpark. So we'll revisit that one more time before we bring this back to council in a final form. But that's the main increase there, as well as because it's picking up pieces from the general fund and other areas, just seeing that inflationary cost across a lot of those operational costs are reflected in that. So I think at 4%, it's probably a reasonable increase.
I just have a question. You mentioned anyways under the expenditures and the administration salary being split in between the other participants, the joint ventures and so forth. I was just backtracking anyways. When we go back to the RDN for the, I'm just looking at the easiest one, the biggest one, the 74% Parksville and 26% RDN. Why would not the RDN portion of that, the expenditures, why would not we show that in the revenue column in the page before as to revenue received from the RDN on behalf of their portion? What is it in here, or am I missing it?
Let me just jump to the next slide here. The reason it's not shown as a revenue to Parksville is that we record all of the costs in ERWS and AWS, and then we pick up our net share. So ERWS essentially reflects that revenue there against Parksville's costs, and we're just picking up our share of that. So if, for example, half of that person's salary is reflected in ERWS, then the RDN pays their share of that. We just then pick up Parksville's 74% of that back in. So the revenue flows through ERWS rather than through the city of Parksville, just because the joint venture is kept separate.
Right. So in as so much that then how does that billing work back to our partners? Like the 26%, how does that?
Right. So when we, when the ERWS or AWS budgets are adopted by each municipality, then those municipalities receive the budget and their requisition is noted in the budget. So if there's $5 million of costs and the RDN shares whatever it is, that's their requisition, then they cut a check to Parksville for that amount. And we essentially keep a separate set of books related to ERWS and it flows through there, but it flows through, we do all the accounting for it. So they actually cut us checks that are close to or adjusted to their requisition amount in the year. Then at the end of the year, we actually reconcile to actual. So if in any year they had cut us a check for X dollars, but the actual ended up being less than that, then we would just tweak the next year's requisition. So there's the next year's less what you didn't actually have to pay last year. And it's adjusted on a go-forward basis like that.
Right. And I think you just touched on the fact that the administration of all of this, like your administration and everything, even those ERWS accounting, So that administration is built into the chargeback to our partners.
That's right. Yeah, we have allocations of various staff that spend a lot of time, right? Like operations staff or finance staff has an allocation into ERWS and AWS. And some of the other higher level stuff is just shared between the partners that contribute to the management of the joint ventures. So say our CAO's time and similar on the RDN, their water staff and higher level director staff is kind of a shared management of the operations of it. But when we're looking at the more direct staff time, yes, there are allocations that we charge to the ERWS for that.
Okay. The part I like to hear was when you said that they cut a check and they sent it to us. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yes, great. Okay, so looking at the joint venture costs, in the bylaw, this is called purification and treatment, but essentially reflects the operations of the AWS and ERWS, the water treatment plant and the dam costs. As a reminder, AWS is about 64% of the AWS, and the ERWS is about 74% Parksville. And the costs that are noted there, I broke out this year the amounts that are contributed to reserve through the joint ventures so that you're aware that we're also contributing to reserves within the joint ventures, as well as having our own direct contribution to reserve through the parcel tax. And so the AWS operating costs, again, you can see there's nominal increase overall in the operating costs and a similar contribution to the reserve within the joint venture of nearly $27,000 a year. And that's been going on for a number of years. The ERWS costs overall are down a little bit as compared to prior year. And that's partially as a result of some significant minor capital projects last year. But we did, through the management board, double the amount that was being contributed to the reserve within ERWS. So from a total of $100,000 to $200,000, our share being $148,000 of that. So I'm just breaking out our total requisition to the ERWS is made up of those two components, plus the capital that you'll see when we go through the capital plan. And just as a reminder, these financial plans of the joint ventures were adopted by Parksville Council on January 16th. So when that happens, we just then take that plan and incorporate our share into the water fund in the Parksville plan. Okay. Okay, moving into minor capital for the water fund. And as I said, there's a lot of different projects happening in minor capital and capital. Lots of great work being done on our infrastructure, especially. So on the minor capital side, this is a picture of the inside of railway well number 2, and there's a groundwater study being done related to the well system this year. So just trying to provide some graphic related to the lines in the spreadsheet. Looking ahead, we've got the water master plan is in 2023. Again, one of those 4 infrastructure plans that is being completed in this year. And the groundwater study that I just referenced got started last year, and it's a $40,000 carry forward in the current year. There's a number of other projects there that are noted, and including a valve stem replacement and some other assessment work. And again, looking out a number of years, staff identifying work that they know needs to be done in the coming years, and those are noted there in the minor capital. We've got that community parks project contingency amount, which we've talked about in each of the funds. And then there's that contingency that's been pulled out of operating for the wells and pumps replacement. So rather than having that in each different pump and well system, pull it out into one, because it's not as though we would expect every one of them to have a failure or unexpected replacement in a year. So just showing that as a $50,000 line item in minor capital every year, and in subsequent years being funded by carry forward if it wasn't to be spent in any one year. The ERWS minor capital we're picking up here at $129,500, and that relates to some resiliency work that they're doing and studies in ERWS. That's a minor capital item for them. And then in 2024, they're doing some work on network switches and a membrane assessment. So that's our share at $72,000 in the ERWS. Okay, moving on to capital. This is a picture of Springwood well number 10, and you'll see in the capital plan that over 2023 and 2024, there's a total of about $312,000 being done on the renewal of this. And I'm suggesting in the plan that that be funded with gas tax. So looking at the water capital fund, there's some significant other, rather than our just standard infrastructure project that is led by engineering, which this year is Moss Avenue. There's a number of different items, as you can see there, that are being done on kind of minor equipment, but still a significant part of our infrastructure, especially with respect to the well system. And so I'm proposing that some of that be funded by gas tax. And in a couple of slides, I'll suggest that perhaps we should consider funding more of it with gas tax. There is a lot going on in our water fund and our utility, and it may be a beneficial way to allocate some of the gas tax by supporting the water fund more. Their capital reserve is lower than the other funds, and so supporting it with gas tax to allow the capital reserve to accumulate more, I think would be a good idea and a decision that council could make this year if it chose. Again, noting that there's about $208,000 of carry forward on this related to some of those projects that are carrying over from prior years. And the ERWS in here is the capital project is finishing up the residual handling out at the water treatment plant. And that is partially funded by DCCs, as we saw in the revenue section. I'll point out to you one significant number that goes across nearly all of the years, and that's the instrumentation and controls PLC renewal. And it totals of about $500,000 over 5 years, mostly in the water fund, but there's a component in 2026 in the sewer fund as well of $75,000. And what our manager of utilities shared with me is this is related to our automation system hardware at the Springwood Water Complex, at Top Bridge, and at the Martindale and Craig Bay pump stations. And that equipment is getting to the end of its useful life, and it's hard to find replacement parts. So the amounts that are laid out in the capital plan is really a complete renewal of that. It'll replace that and then provide increased reliability, one of those key factors that we look for in this system. An engineering consultant as part of this project will be engaged to provide design and programming for the SCADA system and have it tied to that. And it will also give us enhanced capabilities to allow remote continuous monitoring of this equipment, including things like pumps and chlorine analyzers. And so it's due to be replaced, but we'll also have some enhanced capability as a result of just more modern technology as it's replaced. Part of what I was suggesting we might use the gas tax for is to do this renewal project through gas tax.
Councillor Gower.
Thank you, Mayor. Ms. Holmes, what is the life of this system once it's replaced?
I'm going to have to refer
PLC?
to our manager utilities for that. Thank you, Heidi.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mayor. So is this gas tax going to be there for, do we know how long it's going to last, Ms. Holmes?
Through the mayor. So this current year is our last year of receiving the gas tax for sure, although the federal government is talking as though it may be renewed, but we don't know that for sure yet. So what I am hearing though from the UBCM, which is one that administers the gas tax, is that they're looking for municipalities to have their gas tax committed within their 5-year plan or spent in order to put them in a better bargaining position to negotiate for the program to continue. And I think the understanding is if everybody's just put their gas tax in the bank, maybe you don't need it after all, and we don't need to continue the program. So that's kind of the message that I'm getting from the UBCM and trying to provide to you as to what they feel is going to put them in their best negotiating position.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, this is just one more picture of that equipment as part of that whole PLC renewal. across the 5-year plan. And staff has tried to do the project over 5 years in a logical fashion, but also without the very significant hit of doing it all in 1 year. And so by the end of it, I think we'll have a much more modern technology related to this. Okay, finally for the water fund, just looking at the reserve transfers, we see the $450,000 funding envelope contribution, which is part of that $4 million amount, as well as the contribution to the water treatment plant capital reserve of about 143 and increasing 143,000 per year going forward. However, there's significant drawdown on the capital reserve. And what I'm trying to do with our financial plan is set it up in a way that we would want to be funding it, i.e. putting the money into reserve and taking out of reserve rather than having the taxes go up and down. So although we have some contribution from the gas tax reserve there, our capital reserve gets drawn down very significantly within this 5-year plan. So I'm suggesting we need about another $500,000 contribution to the reserve over the 5 years, and that we could possibly do that with gas tax towards those projects. So we're going to look at the gas tax next. And so I'll just leave that out there for council's consideration as we move through that. That would be my recommendation, though, is that we would be able to commit the last of the gas tax to the water fund and show it as fully committed. For your information, the capital reserve at the end of 2022 is only about $660,000. And by the end of this 5-year plan is getting down to about 150,000. So it is low. Again, I know we're going to be looking at that as we go through the year and how we're going to fund this, but what I would suggest to you is that water is one of our most critical services that we provide to our residents. And so it's very important that we keep on top of that. That said, our unrestricted surplus in the water fund, there's still, I think about $6 million there. And so it's not as though we're completely out of reserves, but I do want us to get to a point where we're functioning our infrastructure replacement through the capital reserves and not relying so much on the unrestricted, where we can use those funds for other kind of unexpected or non-recurring type items. The water treatment plant reserve is at about $500,000 at the end of 2022. By the end of 5 years, we're up to about 1.2 million in that. So that's going in a very good way as we look forward at the replacement of the water treatment plant.
Yes, Jed, just a question regarding the water fund reserve. What would you feel would be adequate annual contribution to that, possibly funded by the gas tax?
I think
your
it's
recommendations.
Yeah, thank you. It's about $125,000 or $150,000. In the analysis of the gas tax, I'll go through kind of what I had suggested as contributions, okay, but in that kind of ballpark, at least to keep us even within the 5-year plan until we have the rest of the information to really look at what it should be based on all of our water infrastructure.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the water fund before we move into our next agenda item?
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Holmes, if we have to do any, like adding more upgrades to, you know, the lake, you know, Arrowsmith Lake or whatever, is this what this money, the reserves are for? I mean, because there's more infrastructure that may have to be done at some point. How does it work?
Right.
Thank you.
Through the mayor. So the dam and the water treatment plant, because those are joint ventures, the discussion is slightly different, although ultimately it comes back to the municipalities that are participating in those joint ventures. But for example, with the water treatment plant, Parksville chose to fund that partially with debt, a significant part with grants, and then there would have also been part coming from our water fund as well. And so there would be long range planning related to that typically. And so in your example, if work needed to be done on the Arrowsmith Dam or the technology and infrastructure that brings it to our water treatment plant, that would be part of a longer range look. And that's the type of work that we're doing right now. And so if there was something identified in that area as part of that work, then we would be bringing that back to council to say, okay, this needs to be done. And then we would work with our joint venture partners to decide when, how would that be funded? Because the RDN could choose to fund it one way and we could choose to fund it a different way, right? We each need to come up with our share of the costs going into that. So it doesn't have to be the same way it's funded, right. But it's all part of this long-term asset program that we're doing, the asset management program.
Okay. I have experience with that in Victoria. There was a day in the 90s where the tree huggers said, no, we can't have any more trees down. And we had to only flush when we could. We were told that actually happened. And the water, and there was no water for the Empress Hotel, for the lawns even. It was ridiculous. So they took, I don't know, they raised it 15 feet or something, the dam, and they have enough water. So you know what I'm saying? So we have to be wise and plan like you're doing. So I appreciate what you do. Thank you.
Yeah. Through the mayor, you're right, and this is part of all of the plans and work that we're doing this year, and so I think we'll be bringing some data back on that. The unknown factor in all of this, of course, is climate change and how this impacts, right? So there are some things we can study and bring data on. There are other things that we have to rely and we maybe it's the wild card in it, right? Yeah. So I think all we can do is try and prepare as best we can and make sure that our reserves and surpluses are healthy to be able to respond to whatever might come along. Okay, next is a question that council had proposed at our first financial plan meeting, and I wanted to bring you back some information on that so that you can give some consideration to it before our meeting next week. And the question was how we might fund the fire hall renovation and addition. And so just to kind of review, last year, council approved the property of the purchase of the two adjacent properties, and that was about $1.4 million. In 2023, the financial plan proposes that we start with some preliminary design and kind of cost magnitude estimates, and guessing that that'll be about $200,000. And in the current financial plan, I'm suggesting that could be funded from our land sale reserve. I followed up with UBCM, and that cannot be funded with gas tax. The preliminary analysis can't be funded. However, we can go back and use and kind of back claim it if the project ends up going ahead. So you can't fund it initially, but if you use that to actually go forward with the project, then it could be funded. Fortunately, we have our land sale reserve and it could be funded out of that. And then finally is deciding on the timing and design related to the construction of a renovation, addition, whatever that looks like. And it's been in the plan for 2024, 2025 for many, many years. And so we're at a point now where we need to really look at decisions and funding around that and get council's direction on when and how that may move forward. So what I would suggest to you is we've got some internal sources such as gas tax and our land sale reserve that could be used to fund the fire hall. External sources that would be part of this equation include the funding that we get from the RDN service agreements. And so although they wouldn't necessarily cut us a check related to the construction, it's all built into the fees that we charge them. And the way the capital is managed is at 20-year averaging. So over 20 years, we would get repaid essentially their 29% of whatever capital is purchased within our fire department, whether that's apparatus or buildings or anything of that nature. So I want to note that that's part of it, although it doesn't end up in our bank account when we're constructing. And then the last external source that's possible is there have been some grants available from time to time related to fire halls. Our fire chief is aware of a couple of island fire departments that have been able to take advantage of grants. The proviso on this, though, is that often the gas tax doesn't work well and play well with other grants. There's a restriction on the gas tax that you can't have other federal monies and things on that. So depending on who the grant body is, we may or may not be able to use that. What I would suggest to you is that if one did become available, we would fully investigate it, and the fire chief is actively looking for grants. We would have to consider, okay, is there a different way we could put the project together to still be able to use the grant and gas tax? So that would be an equation and an analysis at the time. So my recommendation would be to provide council with funding alternatives that we don't need the grants, And then if we get a grant, then we could reallocate those funds. But to show you how we might do it just based on the funding sources that we have available to us right now. Right now, there isn't a grant on the table, and so we're not sure when that might happen. So first, just to
sorry, Councillor Gordon, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. And to Ms. Holmes, perhaps it's going to come up in the next few slides, but I'll ask you anyways. The internal sources and the external sources, what do you think would be the possibility of, like, the percentage-wise, how much of this project, close to $3.6 million, the fire hall renovation, could be funded by the internal, and the rest with, can you project the division, the percentage-wise? And also, since the fire chief is not here, perhaps, I don't know if you're aware of information from him, what is the projection in seeing the growth of Parksville, that this addition and renovation, how long will this serve the community, for how many years?
Through the mayor, to your second question, I'm not sure how much he's kind of put thought into that, subject to doing some of the design work. So I think what the design work may do is provide some alternatives based on different growth models, right? So how many apparatus do we expect to need with different population forecasts? So I expect that would be a part of the design work. Yeah. I don't know if our CAO has anything to add on that. Okay. And then with respect to the proportions, we're going to get into some of that analysis in the next couple of slides. So if you don't mind, we'll just move forward on that. Okay. So the first thing I wanted to go through with council is just really to summarize where we have gas tax. I know you've seen it thrown at you in different areas of our financial plan, but this summarizes within our 5-year plan where we're at with respect to current allocations, and reflecting the funds we expect to receive this year and where we would be at if this is all we did at the end of 2027. So the balance at the end of 2022 is about 5.3 million. We get another 635,000 in the current year. And we've allocated within the plans that I've gone through with you in the general fund and the water fund, about nearly 5 million of that into the plans. Within the funding and financial plan proposals that have been brought to you, there was the Blower Road culvert removal, which we had suggested be funded by gas tax at 150,000. So I've got that listed just below because that hasn't been included into the financial plan yet. And then the second line there is what I was just chatting about with respect to additional contributions to water, and showing that I think that's about $500,000 over those 4 years, some additional contributions. If that's what we did, we would still have 335,000 of unallocated gas tax within this 5-year plan. So that's our starting point right now. The next slide, what I've tried to do is identify if we know that we would like to allocate the gas tax, at least some or all, towards the fire hall and be able to fund that. The yellow highlighted amounts are ones that I think could be reallocated to the fire hall. And I'll just walk through those with you. The smallest of those is the LED lighting. We spend about $32,000 on LED lighting around the city and fund it with gas tax. I think that that's something that probably we could absorb within the various functional areas in the city without too much of a blip in our property taxes or other rate increases. And so that's probably one that we could pull out. We could pull out the ending balance that's projected of 335,000. There's also infrastructure works of, I'll just pop back on this, that 2.25 million, the second line down, 750,000 times 3, has just been an amount that's in the financial plan to support infrastructure renewal, but is not allocated to a specific project. And so I think that's something we could say, let's pull that out and support that with respect to the fire hall instead of roads infrastructure, where we actually have some reserves and DCCs are often applicable. So the 2.25 million I'm suggesting could be pulled out and reallocated to the fire hall. Of the $1 million that in the current plan is allocated to Moss Avenue infrastructure, I'm suggesting that we could allocate only 500,000 of it to roads because there is still some capital room in the general fund. Pull 300,000 of that out to support Moss in the water fund and allocate a remaining 300,000 of that to the fire hall. And that would give us $3 million towards the fire hall, which I think is the funding that we need. The next slide summarizes basically the project and what would be my recommendation, subject to council's questions and discussion, for funding the fire hall within what we have in our 5-year financial plan. So to summarize and look at the project as a whole, we have to include last year's costs, including the land acquisition. And then 2023, we would suggest would be design and order of magnitude cost estimates. And then what is currently in the financial plan is 1.4 million. The fire chief is suggesting it would be an additional 3.6, so a total of 5 million for construction. Now, in the environment that we're in, we really don't know how close that is to accurate. And to some degree, it also depends on the design. So this is based on his best estimate, and he's looked at and analyzed a lot of different fire halls being constructed of similar sized and other communities. And so the total project cost would be about 6.6 million. So what we know is of that, the RDN's share is typically about 29%. So I'm showing that their funding on that would be about 1.9 million. We could fund 3 million from gas tax, and the land sale reserve has a balance in it currently of about 1.3 million. We could just pull only another 300,000 out of that. We wouldn't even, that would leave $1 million in the land sale reserve because we already used the land sale reserve previously to buy the land. And so that has already borne a significant part of this project. So we would still, for anything else that might come up in other areas of the city, we would still have $1 million left in the land sale reserve. If we were to do this, this would show our gas tax fully committed within our 5-year plan, but also allow us to fund the fire hall completely within these sources that I would suggest are somewhat within our control, not subject to getting a grant or something else. So that's my recommendation, and follow up to your question of March 15th as to how we might put that together based on current estimates. What I would suggest with respect to the gas tax, Canada Community-Building Fund, is that the key point with funds being used by gas tax is community benefit. And I would suggest to you that perhaps after water, the fire hall is one of our most critical services and benefits all of the community. So it's very impactful in terms of spending funds on the fire hall as compared to other projects that may not impact our whole population.
Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Holmes, for example, when we have these budgets and all this organized, but the RDM pays a percentage, do they just accept what we do? Or do they go over it like, do they negotiate, or how does it work? Thank you.
Through the mayor. So we have a 5-year service agreement related to the provision of fire rescue services. And yeah, their finance staff go through it, but we openly share our calculations and provide the information so that they can review it. I think we have a great relationship on that front. I expect there is some negotiation, and it is subject to change depending on some of the proportion sharing is based on the assessments to some degree. And so, but that's all laid out in the agreement, and yeah.
Just a question. So is this going to, say the fire hall renovation proposal goes through here, would this totally eliminate our accumulated gas tax fund? Like will it use up all the balance?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. And is that the 2022 amount that's already sitting in the bank as well as 2023? That's, I don't know if we've received 2023 yet, have we?
We haven't. We typically receive it in the summer,
right? July
or August.
So is that reflecting the 2023 amount that's coming in as well as the 2022 and previous balance sitting in the gas tax fund?
Yes. So I'll just pop back to this slide that shows we've got that opening balance and then the 635. And so yes, it would completely commit the gas tax, but not take away from those other projects that are still noted there. Just the ones that I highlighted is where I would suggest we reallocate to the fire hall. All of those other projects would still be funded by gas tax in that summary that has the yellow highlights on it.
Right. Okay. My only question is that I think it's a really good suggestion here, but I'm worried about things like the Rath River Trail connection. We talked about whether we're going to fund that out of DCC and out of the gas tax, and so I'm a little worried that that's going to take money from Peter to pay the new Paul that lives in the fire hall.
Right. So I think the most significant portion of the Rath Trevor is DCCs. So there's a very small increment that would even be eligible for funding with the gas tax with respect to the Rath Trevor Trail.
Right.
But yes, it does, whatever else might come along.
Yeah, it's quite the commitment for the gas tax for that, because with the gas tax, has been funded. So, the idea is that we have our strategic plan that we just put through we just approved on last Friday. So my concern is by doing this at the time, are we I would at least any resolutions we put through on the strategic plan that I hope to do today would be based on not saying where the funding is coming from, is like putting it back to the staff, because what accounts they get pulled from, type of thing. So I'm a little reluctant to think. My first reaction is just do the resolution here, but I think that it's very important that we recognize that we worked long and hard on our strat plan anyways, and we want to make sure that we don't extinguish all or use all the funding. Extinguish is just, once again, referring to the fire hall. Is just we don't use it all in one place, and then just saying sorry strategic plan, that would have been paid for. I know we have there's one very big large kitty sitting there waiting right now in the growing community fund, but I'm just that's my kind of reasoning here. I'm a little reluctant. I would like to. I think it would be prudent of us to put through the resolutions that we want to based on the strategic plan, and then this as well type of thing based on the fact that we've already done this. That's kind of where I'm going at here. It's a good plan, but it all depends on how much money is left for what we put through out of those respective accounts. Understand what I'm trying to go with this? Right.
All good points. So what I would suggest to you is, yes, you did just receive a large check that can be used towards other capital projects. And so that offsets, certainly if you hadn't received that, that makes this a different conversation perhaps.
Right.
I would also suggest that there's still $1 million left in the land sale reserve at the end of this, which initially in kind of my initial thought process was maybe we pull that right down and still leave some in gas tax. So the land sale reserve is actually quite flexible. It is capital, but it doesn't just need to be about buying land. It can be used towards capital infrastructure and things like that. There are funds in DCCs that will be available for Rath Trevor and other projects that when we do our DCC renewal next year, we'll identify new projects that can be funded using those DCCs. And then, as we've chatted about before, when we look at the reserves policy, there's, especially in the general fund, quite a large amount of unrestricted surplus. And so spending some time analyzing how council wants to use that, including possibly reallocating some of it to reserves, has been one of the suggestions. There may be additional funds there. So notwithstanding what the UBCM is saying, there is truth to the fact that Parksol's been saving this money for a decade, right? And so I think what UBCM and the federal government wants to see is that we actually get it spent and it gets allocated to a project. So it's council's decision, of course, to decide whether that's the fire hall or a trail or whatever it is. What I think is important is that we demonstrate the need for it by actually using it on a project.
So to answer, okay, sorry, CAO Kaler. Yeah,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just want to also mention that the land sale reserve is only what's in there right now. If there are pending sales of land or transactions, that's not reflected.
Right.
And a lot of those are, things that would happen in a closed meeting, and discussions would be released at the appropriate times. But if there's anything pending that's not reflected, or anything that happens in the 5-year term of this financial plan.
And just touching on that land sale reserve of $1 million, is some of that $1 million actually reserved for parking? No, it's separate. Okay, that's good, because if we are looking at providing or leasing or getting other parking area type of thing, then we still have that money. Do you know approximately how much is in that reserve, just off the top of your head?
I think it's about 450,000, 500.
About
Yeah.
500 grand. Thank
Yeah.
you.
So no, that's separate from the land sale
Okay,
reserve.
that's good. So it's not going to wipe that out. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Any other questions, Council? Yeah, Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick comment here to Ms. Holmes. I guess with looking at the funding sources, you kind of briefly touched on the possibility of getting some grants, and yourself and the fire chief will be looking at those as well. So that might free up some money, possibly. So
Through the mayor, possibly. Although often what we have found is with the gas tax, there aren't combinations that we can use together. But I think until the design work is done, and of course, if council decides to move forward with this as it is, obviously all of that has to come back to council with respect to the design and the estimates again, so that we can revisit whether this is a reasonable estimate or whether this needs to change. And what we're hoping is maybe we're catching the down cycle of construction costs, and may hit a sweet spot here, and that would be our hope. But certainly we'll continue to look for grants in case there's some way that we can supplement this and leave other funds to be spent elsewhere. But I just wanted to illustrate for council how you may be able to do it within the current year financial plan with what we know right now.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Grants.
Thank you, Mayor. Through to our Director of Finance. Thank you for preparing this proposal around funding the fire hall. I wonder if perhaps, if the fire chief is contemplating other sort of creative options as well. I had an interesting one floated to me recently by someone I trust about another fire hall in Nanaimo putting housing above the fire hall, or any creative things like that being considered.
Through the mayor, I know he has considered that as just kind of a plethora of ideas to address a couple of different things. One is many fire halls, of course, have housing within for their staff. I know that there's been a fire hall in Vancouver that was built and had social housing above the fire hall, which has, I'm sure, positives and negatives associated with that. So I think part of that design consultation may look at that. I'm not sure that that's on his agenda right now, but I know in discussions in the past, he's looked at a variety of alternatives to accomplish different goals. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? That's 40. Councillor Grants, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One more quick one, just further to the Peter and Paul that Mayor was referencing. I do note that $1 million in the coming year is going to be allocated from the community building fund for the Moss Avenue road work, which I guess you're feeling comfortable with the $750,000 from the 3 years subsequent not being available anymore from that fund?
Through the mayor, the general fund capital reserve is a little bit higher than the others. And so with the implementation of that funding envelope going into that, it's actually working out quite well in that, because we've brought down the level of budgeted infrastructure as well as making those regular contributions. Of course, when when I take all of this information from council, we do one more kind of check on all of this to make sure that when all of your resolutions and suggestions are incorporated, that we still feel like, okay, this is still okay. So there'll certainly be one more check on it. But at this point, I think that it is. All of this, of course, is subject to all of this information we're going to get. The good and the bad of getting all this great data is that, okay, it might be something more than we expect. And then we'll have to revisit how some of that happens. But at this point, I think that this is possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions? Looking forward to, we're going to other considerations here. At this time, I'm cognizant of the time where we're running. Are we going to 12:30 today? Is it 12:30? I think it'd be prudent for this time for us to put through our resolutions anyways for the strategic plan. At this point, the council's comfortable. I'd like to pull out the ones because we have to give staff direction and so forth, so they can allocate funds where possible. So I'd like to make a motion at this time from our strategic plan discussion that we request staff to complete a comprehensive water data evaluation and storage study and recommendations for the water system complete. And we talked about this, what we're getting for. This is the total comprehensive plan, including, and we'll work with staff anyways to what that means. But this is we already discussed it at the strat plan. I mean, if you want to discuss it more, we can here. If you have any questions, what that is, but it's the full evaluation and so forth that we spoke of. Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. It is definitely one of the strategic priorities. I definitely support this. I would feel more comfortable when we have the two other councillors present so they can have their input as well before we start spending on this. But you are the chair if you decide this is.
The only question I'd like to carry on forward to this, because there's other ramifications of some of these that are pertinent to the RDN decisions that they're making at this time as well. I'm going to talk about the aquatic center next, so forth. And that's why I'm suggesting that.
If I may, Mayor, that's why I was hoping that we could have a fulsome discussion with all the other councillors. Could wait next week, or we only have the meeting at 6 p.m. I'm just hoping, I would like to have it a more complete discussion so everybody gets an input, because I think everybody is looking at this big check and they probably want to have something to say to.
Do I have a seconder for my motion, I guess? Yes, thank you. If you have any other questions regarding, I think we know what we're talking about. The reason is I'm suggesting that we do it here. We have to do it timely because everything else is reliant on our financial plan. Is to do this because there's a bunch of other packages that were proposed from staff previously with a whole bunch of things that they want to get, and we want to provide them direction as well. So the fact that, I'm telling you right now, Councillor Fraz has not been in many of these, so suggesting we're going to hold up waiting for that. Councillor Beal is not here. I'm not sure if she is away or she just is. She was planning on going away at some time. I don't know that we can, that I think that we're capable of making these decisions since we already talked about it in the strategic plan. Is only my thoughts. Anybody else want to discuss why this couldn't be put through today? Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Does it all have to be done today, or could there be cherry pick some of it? I mean, you mentioned the water, but the whole strategic plan's being done today?
Well, just the recommendations that we did for the strategic plan. You're not happy with that?
No.
Councillor Grant.
Sorry, just I guess a point of order. Would you be able to restate the motion?
That council instructs staff to consult to work with a consultant to complete a comprehensive, complete water data evaluation and storage study and recommendations to evaluate the entire water system for the city of Parksville, which would be including the, I had my other notes. We discussed what the total consumption is of the water, what the usages of the water, what the storages of the water, what we currently have, including those items such as climate change and future growth and all the other things, and then also evaluating whether we have sufficient storage and what that storage looks like, and if there's any further recommendations to storage. And also if there's other recommendations that would actually remediate the problems with the filtration plant. And I can go on and on, but anyways, that's kind of what it's going. It's comprehensive. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question to your motion. Is this for staff to provide a report so that we know if the RFP is going out or how much it's going to cost, maybe an estimate, or what is the motion asking staff to do?
To actually set up an RFP to do exactly that. Sure. To set up an RFP to do the following, everything that I elaborate on. Okay. And if it's a cost factor, then that's fine. That all of these will have a cost factor based on it. Okay. But the idea is that as much of this could be funded from our existing budget. Councillor Kayla.
Thank you. Or
Councillor Kayla. I don't know if you've been promoted or demoted. CAO Kaler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had a question about, so to understand the motion, it's for staff to do the RFP with the items and scope that you mentioned. Will council be assigning a budget or budget source for this, or is this, we had discussed perhaps using the 789 out of the, whatever that new name is called for that grant. Is that something that you would be comfortable with for this motion so that we can actually allocate some of the money before we go to RFP?
Yes, exactly that. And what it would be is I would always defer to staff at any of the motions, like when we're talking about the aquatic center and so forth, the other things that we have coming up. It would be, oh, well, this would be better funded out of this, leaving it to staff. We know that we have 4.7 sitting in the bank, but some of it might be better funded by DCC. So I would always defer on staff to look at it, and not suggesting that we have to go after any further grants, but just suggesting that staff come back with the funding formulas for that. And
if I may, what may work is if you want to provide those resolutions, is we could come up with a best guess cost estimate. Yes. At next week's meeting, it could be these could be incorporated as part of the overall list of things that need decisions. Yeah. In which case staff could go and identify some possible funding alternatives as part of that. And then at next week's April 12th meeting, you could make a final decision on each of those so that they could be all considered together.
Does that work good?
Perhaps that would be a way to move forward on it.
I would be pleased with that. That would probably be the best way, rather than just having a discussion. Okay, just off the top of our heads, we think we can use this for that. Yes, that would be excellent. So
right. So then, just as a suggestion, the items that have come up at previous meetings, including what we just proposed with respect to the fire hall, would be on that list. And if you want to provide any others that would form part of that kind of what I'm calling the decision list, yes, for next week's meeting, we would summarize those together. And if you recall, that first meeting had a chart of various funding proposals and identified the funding sources, so we could set it up in a similar way for council's review.
That would be great. So can I just list off the items that I pulled from with your this? Yes. So
that will change the motion then, right?
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll reword the motion, if I may, to amend the motion to for council to put through a list this is from our meeting today, because we can get the fire hall in there as well. For staff to prepare costing sources for the following forthcoming resolutions. Councillor Wood, do you agree with that? You seconded. Thank you. Okay, so on that basis, if we can We already have the water fund analysis, if we have that. The next one would be 16 dedicated pickleball courts in the community park. As the next one, we have the downtown, sorry. Oh, sorry, I didn't see, sorry. Thank you. CEO Kaler.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So you said 16 dedicated pickleball courts. Does it have to be in the community park? Is that,
yes,
that's the,
yeah, in the community park, in the, we talked preliminary in discussions way back when, in the lot adjacent to the curling rink.
okay, so costing just?
Yeah, so the costing is based on the fact that we already have the land. We don't have to do land purchase. And then the aquatic center, looking at hiring consultants to take the aquatic center project to the next to the conceptual design stage for preliminary cost estimates. That's that one, and then pickleball. Sorry, and
Excuse me.
Yes, Councillor Martin.
The idea of the aquatic center, is this just an aquatic center, or is it a aquatic center with other things attached to it, or what are we going to do with that?
Yeah, when we put out the RFP for the consultant, we'll have a discussion about that. The staff will come back to us and say,
okay,
what does the consultant want? What do we want the consultant to do?
Okay.
And that will be to take the analysis from the prior public record to put something together to take it to that stage. But yes, have a fulsome discussion.
Yes.
But just to take it, just to get it moving to the next stage.
Okay.
Yes. And then the only other one we had was for a consultation study for the downtown revite. We changed that word instead of revite. What would we had something better? The downtown revite, including the parking, traffic calming, and it wasn't beautification. We had vibrancy. Thank you. The downtown vibrancy review, including parking, traffic calming, and so forth. So once again, that would be an RFP to set that up. And then for the final one, I would say, and to look at the fire hall expansion renovation. The fire hall renovation and addition recommended proposal to look at what that costs and where those costs could be pulled from. Mm-hmm. Did I miss it? Yeah, Councillor Gar.
If I may add to the list, the community track, there's possible funding for the Oceanside community track.
Through the mayor, that's already on the list.
It is?
Yeah, I think we're already there. Yeah, we set up initially on it, and then the RDN was actually been part of that as well. Councillor Gore. Yes, we want to make sure. Councillor CAO Keller.
It's on the list, but we have not settled the final amount that our CFO is working with the other CFOs as to what other amounts the other partners might be willing to contribute. But the item itself is already on our list.
So if I may, Mayor, so would that be a discussion we can have on the 12th about the amount? Possibly?
In what?
We can discuss the amount that the Parksville is willing to allocate towards the track on the 12th.
Yeah, so if I may, through the mayor, we would provide our recommendations for all. My understanding is for all of these items, we would be looking at, staff would be looking at some kind of an estimate of what that cost would be. So for example, you know, what would the cost be to construct pickleball courts? Right. What would the cost be to hire a consultant? So there'll be a lot of other details that we would have to figure out. Like, for example, like just these would be sort of a ballpark figure right. to put into the budget, but then the details of what the RFPs are going to look like is going to have to come later. But for the community track, what staff would be bringing forward is kind of a recommended ratio based on what we've already contributed and based on what the partners might be willing to contribute, or based on a formula that we think is fair. And then that would be up to the partners to decide if they are in agreement.
Yes.
Just a quick comment. Thank you, Madam CAO. I know you folks are superhuman for the amount of work that you guys do. But you think you have enough time to bring those RFPs and numbers to us in a week? All these resolutions?
If I may, not the RFPs,
No.
just the amounts.
Yeah.
So this would be like ballpark. Yeah, we kind of know like how much most of these things would cost. Obviously, the caveat would be that the nuances and the details would have to come at a later date. But yeah, we can put fairly good guesses around a lot of these.
Yes, and that would be the intent. That we're just looking for a ballpark, and what we in the past, what we do, Councilor Goris, we take a ballpark and then we'll go healthy. We'll add like a contingency on top of that, 10 to 20%. You know, just so that staff don't have to come back to council and ask for a further $100,000 or something because we hadn't thought of that. So it's usually a very generous, so that we know, so that we can identify a generous amount from whatever fund we're taking it. So, Councilor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What about other things we had on our strategic plan, for example, housing?
It's not
on that original plan we did last week?
Not on the plan we did on Friday.
There's no housing in there?
No.
Really? Okay. I
Yeah,
misspoke. I thought we did.
Not for my notes.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just to sort of wade in on a little bit of process. So the strategic plan is not adopted. I know council has spent a lot of time on your drafts, and we will be bringing back the final objectives in a public meeting for council to discuss and adopt. But at this time, there were a lot of priorities thrown out there at the beginning, but the 6 priorities that we had discussed with the consultant do not include housing as an explicit goal.
I guess I made a mistake. I thought it was on there. Thank you.
It was on the previous one, but it wasn't on this one.
You know, I find it really hard to accept because this has been such a concern about our citizens. And we had a discussion about this. And how did it slip through like that? I don't know, because I had it from everybody about housing. And if we had a piece of land somewhere that we do some co-op housing or something, maybe we could do that. But of course, it's not even there now. It's out.
As I understand it, there was no little red dots assigned to housing or suggestion made with the facilitator, as I recall. It was not. I mean, there was a couple other things that were brought up that didn't get any uptake as well from the councilor's presence. We had pretty fulsome discussion on it, but housing was not there.
Well, I guess it's going to be interesting for the next 4 years. And I feel really concerned about this. I'm just telling you how I feel, because we have a lot of people that live here that want their families and children to be able to live here. And if we don't have an affordable housing mandate, I don't know. Anyway, I'm just sharing my thoughts. And
well, you know already my thoughts. There was a meeting fairly recently about a fairly large land opportunity that was going to provide a lot of housing, and it did not get any acceptance. So that's just to your comments, Councilor Martin.
My situation here is below market and affordable housing. Those were not below market and affordable housings.
That is absolutely untrue. It was a considerable
for all those homes.
There was a considerable amount of actually low rental housing on
if I may, Mayor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I guess we already had the discussion and vote on this.
I'm talking about the future and other lands we may have.
Okay. This is not the time for that, Sylvia. Councilor Martin, we've already discussed it apparently. So having said that, Councilor Grants.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just maybe a question through to staff, if I may. Will staff also be identifying other strategic priorities as part of this motion for bringing forward? No, so we need to add specific 1-by-1 items to.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, so council can add things at different times. So this is just for our final budget. So if items come up throughout your term, later in the year, the day after the budget is adopted, then they're basically through a motion, you can amend, or it could be something in 2024's budget. So it's not that the council is cut off from doing that. So what we're focusing on right now is the final budget for 2023. with some considerations, obviously, for the 5-year plan as well. So if there's items that come up or after council debates the adoption of the strategic plan, if things are amended or refined or changed, there's definitely opportunity to do that afterwards. It just, for this year, we kind of have to understand what the expenditures will be for 2023, but there's definitely opportunity for amending and adding and having other expenditures in 2024, 2025, 2026. So you shouldn't feel like this is it. You have to get everything right now. There's many other opportunities, but obviously from a taxation perspective, these items are currently not factored into the 5-year plan and the tax rates. So next week we will be able to come back with a better sense of just with these items, what that looks like. And then if there are other items that you know, as a council, you want to put in for 2024, 2026, it would be helpful to know those so that we could look at the tax rate over the 5 years, but we often always adjust and amend them as we go. So there should be quite a bit of opportunity over the next few months to look at what your strategic plan implications and projects would be coming out of that.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Councillor Grantham. And what is coming up, what we already had is in the initial City Parcel Financial Plan that we did on March 15th under council initiatives. So this is the one I'm holding on to as well, because my thought process here, council, is that we get our ask in as council initiatives to support our strategic plan. At the same time, afterwards, we already have the council initiatives, you know, that were presented to us previous, and that include the culvert, that included the beach funding increase, and it also had I want to say it's a big modem that Sean wanted as well, and they had said about the PCTC upgrade. So that's going to be coming up. The staff have already provided costing on that. So we have a good idea of that. So if we get the costing for our strat plan items that we want here, then we combine it with the costing that we already have here. And then we can make the decisions whether do we want to go together on the forum upgrade, because maybe that's going to take money that we've just allocated to the fire hall, you know, and we'll have that discussions, exactly that. So we have to have that on the table. And so all that what I'm doing here, I guess the term is I'm placeholding. I'm placeholding right now the strategic plan items that we approve. So just at this stage, so staff have an idea of what to expect from council. That's my intent here. And very good point on the track that we're already there too, because that is obviously something that we've all been, we're receiving a lot of pressure on that as well. So I appreciate that. And so that was all I got from the strategic. Yes, I will, Councilor Martin. I just want to make sure I get them all. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, everything that I pulled off that had a dollar figure on it. That's what I pulled up. Councilor Martin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. So I misunderstand then. So the housing that you've been talking about, because I've heard this many times, there's staff housing, we're going to have priorities for people that are in the, you know, first responders, for workers housing. We have our land over beside the Serious Coffee where we have the Lions or something are coming up. These are all things that is out there. You hear it, but when is it happening or what's happening with all this? Because it's all part of our community and we hear about this, but what is really happening? Thank you.
Okay, I think I understand what you're saying, Councilor Martin, and I can actually say that we have a very robust housing program underway, and things like the Lions housing is still a go. It's already been approved by the previous council for the land dedication. So that's a go. So that's coming. We are already with our in alignment with the provincial government housing strategies and so forth. We already have a very robust the backyard, the cottage. The carriage house conversions and the suites and so forth. We're already doing that. We're getting lots of uptake on that. as well as we already know about the housing projects that we have going on with now Belena's Housing Society that are halfway through the project. In fact, the first half is opening May 1. We also know about the other market housing ones. We dedicated our staff to go looking for, we had, when the previous council came in, it was 0.5 vacancy rate. And now we're almost up to 3%, 4%, and still growing with the amount of development permit applications we have. So we're in a very good place to, honestly, to where we're going. Could we do more? Of course we could do more. But Parksville, I'm really proud of City of Parksville, what we have provided with in the mix in between, you know me, the balanced housing, the amount of social housing is the amount of market housing. We're in a good place. So just, just the conversation. But I think we should keep the, I think we have a resolution on the floor. Yes, okay. We're good. Councilor Grant.
Thank you. Then the only thing I may add then is if the staff can bring forward any other proposals that they may previously brought forward for discussion to have again at the table the next meeting. Thank you.
I think good suggestion. I think, is that possible, CAO Kelly? You okay? You know, that works. Okay. Okay. So we call the question. All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. So, sorry, Jetta, I kind of jumped ahead of your other considerations.
No worries at all. Just a couple more slides, and that's really just to, some of this is no longer apparent. So one of the things just to remind you of what's not in the financial plan yet, and that is that 4.789 million council had resolved to put that into reserves. So next week we may be bringing suggestions as part of what you've just proposed that actually allocate some of that funding. So we'll see how that goes, and the rest will remain in reserves per your original resolution. Costs per council strategic plan, we've got some here. There may be more in the future. So I'll just say that because that plan hasn't been adopted yet, there may be other things that come from that in subsequent years. And then just a reminder that all of the recommendations that we've been talking about with respect to the asset management plan from the asset management program, the valuation and condition assessments, operations, yard environmental assessments, the infrastructure master plans, out of that is going to come a whole lot of data as we've been discussing, some of which may be identified as urgent. And so we don't have that information yet. So just noting for council's information that there may be things that come out of that that will impact the financial plan going forward 2024 or onward that we'll need to incorporate on that basis. And then the final one is just our labor costs. As you all know, the collective agreement ended at the end of last year, and we're seeing some higher than expected settlements. So staff will be just revisiting the costs that have been incorporated and assumptions made to date, just to make sure that we feel like that's still a conservative estimate. And we'll see where we go with that. Finally, just in terms of understanding next steps. So next week's meeting, April the 12th, we'll be bringing you back the list as well as the items that you've identified today, and any other community requests like the track that have come up, so that they'll all be summarized for you in one place for direction next week. And then just a reminder is when we're looking at some of these non-recurring items, we'll probably be looking at sources of revenue that are non-recurring. That said, those aren't infinite, so we may be bringing back changes to the property tax rate related to that, depending on kind of where this goes next week. And so we'll get your direction and approval of final decisions around utility rates and property tax increase. And then just, next week, trying to look at that consideration of a cumulative change, right? If we're looking at $100 increase with the property tax rate and $6 in sewer and $15 with water, you know, for an average resident is maybe about $121 increase where we were to date. So other considerations here may change what that kind of cumulative scenario looks like, depending on how various incremental steps are funded. So we'll bring that information and some estimates around that for your direction next week. And then following that would be to put it all together in a bylaw for your consideration at the beginning of May, that May 1st meeting.
so we're in a good position. We're on track where we should be, so we can get it done in time. Okay, thank you for yeah, on track. That track just keeps on coming up, doesn't it? If it's not a track, it's a fire hall.
So are there any questions about process or any of that before?
Yeah, I just had one question from today's session. I wrote down notes anyways. You mentioned about one contingency fund for minor for minor operations type of thing. You thought that it would be good to have one contingency fund. Do you need direction from council to make that happen? Like to fix an amount on it? Is that something that you can bring forth on the 12th, as well as, you know, for the staff requests, or was that just a suggestion you were making? I just made note of it. I want to ask.
Sure.
Do you need any?
So no, as part of staff preparing the operating expenditure budgets and the minor capital, and you'll see here, this is water, is that we've taken some of those funds that used to be in operating and put them as a contingency line in minor capital. So it's already reflected here. Yeah.
I just want to make sure you didn't need our approval on that. Okay, thank you. And that was, I think, all of my questions. Councillor Wood.
Thank you, Mayor, through yourself to the Director of Finance. Jetta, first of all, thank you very, very much for all your contingency plans and the carry forwards, and, you know, looking forward to seeing what might come up on the, you know, down the road, especially with that RCMP bill that we received. I just think it's amazing that the work that you and your team are doing. I wrote down also a note on my questions page, and it refers back to the paperwork that comes with the property tax bill. I feel like any information that we can do to break down that when people receive their bill is very, very helpful. And I'd love to see us be on kind of the forefront of whatever the, you know, the best practices are for municipalities, to especially speak to the RDN and ask them maybe, hey, what could Parksville include with their property tax bill, and have the RDN put something together so that that people even understand that the RDN is kind of doing their, you know, garbage pickup or their yard waste pickup. You know, some people may not understand that yet. So I think it's a really good opportunity to communicate that, which is obviously part of our strategic plan, is kind of proactive communication. I think that's a really good opportunity there to kind of break down, and might help, you know, less calls to the front desk and things like that. So I just want to mention that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Grant.
Thank you, Mayor, and through to our Director of Finance. I'm certainly going to echo Councillor Wood's comments with regard to the excellent work being done here, and very much appreciate that. And I would also like to, I was going to mention similar things. So first of all, I would ask, if possible, could you at the next meeting bring forward the anticipated numbers for the library and the RDN and basically every expected tax increase that will be on the final bill that our residents will see? So that we have that in our minds as we make our final decisions. So with the greater context, basically. And then building on Director Wood's comments, I think perhaps there's an opportunity for our communications staff to provide some additional information also on the website when you go to pay your bill, that I don't know if maybe a message from the mayor or something else that explains some of the decisions that have gone into the taxes this year, and how we can, so that we can better communicate to residents when they go to pay their fees, that they understand the benefit that they get from that service or from that fee they pay. So those, yeah, so I guess the main thing I was going to mention, so you can give us the full picture next time, so we have that in our heads. Thank you.
Through the mayor, may I just respond to that? So thank you for the feedback. We have the last couple of years really been trying to do more on the communications. So I work quite closely with communication staff once we know what our numbers are. So we'll continue to try and provide more information on that, and appreciate the feedback on that. The second thing with respect to other jurisdictions is not all of them are available. So the school district is typically not available till May 2nd, May 4th. So that one for sure we won't have. The RDN has adopted theirs, so we can bring some information forward, and I have the library as well. So we'll bring what we have. The other ones are smaller impact that we maybe don't have yet, but those significant ones, we'll try and summarize those. Okay.
Councillor Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Holmes. Some excellent job. Very, very well done with your team. I mean, I have to say, to understand all this. And this communication on a website's really good, but on paper's good too. So we need to do it, even though it's paper at this time. If we could put an insert or something, they will just grab it. I know they will. The older people will. And they'll want to see where all their money is going, because everyone's on a fixed income over 65. And that in general, and that is a third of our population. So if they know where their dollars are going, I mean, everyone knows we've had inflation. So that's not a big deal, but just understanding it from our perspective, because I really feel that's important. So I appreciate anything you can do in that regard. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything you do.
Through the mayor, I appreciate the feedback. I will say that each department works on their own financial plans, and they've done a lot of really great work in trying to move funds around and really rein in the cost increases. So I have to give the kudos there as well. Thank you.
Councillor Gore.
Thank you, Mayor. And Jenna, you've probably heard lots of thank yous around this table, but I'll add mine to that. Yeah, we are very fortunate as new councillors, especially having the support from the staff. Yourself presenting these things in lay terms for somebody like me with no finance background. So it really helps me understand how I'm spending or planning on spending people's property tax dollars of Parksville. So I'm very thankful again for this presentation and all the hard work that goes into presenting these, and also throughout the year that you folks do. Especially with the RCMP, as Councillor Wood was mentioning, I was really scared when I first saw the news article, and I sent that link to Kiva asking, hey, is it going to affect our taxes now? But again, proactively, what you've been doing, it's amazing. And yeah, thank you so much for everything that you folks have been doing. Folks that are present here and folks that don't usually come. I know there's a huge staff, close to 100 people. So thank you to all folks. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, and everyone, and thanks for staying awake for all the financial details. It's a lot we have on our plate here, and thank you for your participation. It's very important that we this is serious business here, and we have a great amount of information that's put ahead of us, and which we all get to keep and actually reflect on as the year goes by. And in the interest of communication, the reason I wanted to have the aquatic center as part of the discussion, because around us right now, there's considerations to aquatic centers in other areas. We're referring to the Ravensong pool, and the questions are going to be coming at us, and we have to be responsible enough to give them an answer back as where is Parksville? Everyone's saying is where's Parksville sitting on? So it's very important that the public understands that we are proceeding with the next step at the consultation stage as per our strategic plan to look at further opportunities for creating an aquatic center in Parksville as per the previous council initiative receiving the petition and so forth. So we have to be united on that, so we know, because there's RDN members here at the table that are going to be involved in a very vigorous open council meeting up in Qualicum with the RDN for the Ravensong. So we have to make sure that we're all speaking from the same rule book here, and that was the intent here today. So thank you for that. Is there any questions from the audience? I think I recognize everybody here, but I asked the question. Was there any correspondence received, Amanda? Questions today? Thank you. Is there any further questions from council? Comments or anything at this time? Hearing none, I make sure I haven't forgotten anybody that's just waiting to get up to speak. Seeing no further questions, do I have a mover and seconder for adjournment? Moved by council.